Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. Welcome back to Coast. It's been about a year, but let's get back to J.P. Levasseur. J.P. is a member of the Society for Planetary Research, a veteran instructor of math and science at the Northern Maine Community College. He has begun his research of Mars way back into the mid-1990s. He has published the Journal of Scientific Exploration back in 2002 with Dr. Horace Crater, and in the Journal of Space Exploration in December with co-authors George Haas, William Saunders, and, of course, Dr. Crater as well. So let me say hi first to John. JP, how are you?
Hi, how you doing?
Good to have you back. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, I talked your ear off last time.
That's all right. You're going to talk my ear off again. But it's good stuff. George Haas, of course, love the guy, member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research, founder and premier investigator of the Cydonia Institute. He is a member of the Pre-Columbian Society, and that's a part of the University of Pennsylvania. And he is also an author. Became interested in the face of Mars after reading a book by a Rodolfo Rafael Pozos back in 1991. How's my Spanish, George? Not bad, huh?
That's pretty good, George.
It's good to have you with us, too. It's been about a year since you've been on with me. Let's start with you, George. What have you been doing?
Well, since JP and I were on last, it was
April.
Of the year.
April.
In April last year. We've been trying to get this science paper published, and that's really consumed most of our time. The last time we were here, we had submitted the paper to the Space Technology and Applications International Forum in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which was accepted, and Dr. Crater presented it at the conference. So that was the beginning of this, and I think that's what we spoke about last time we were here.
And George, when this paper that you've been trying to get published, I mean, you're running into some resistance?
It's actually most of the hard work was putting it together, but it's gone pretty smoothly. Dr. Brandenburg recommended that we submit the paper to the conference in Albuquerque, and it was accepted. And after that, we snapped into action and submitted it to the Journal of Space Exploration, which was also a recommendation by Dr. Brandenburg. And JP can tell you about that because he was basically the lead author of the paper, and he did all of
All right, let's go to you on this, JP. Tell us a little bit about this.
About what it is to publish a paper like that.
Not easy, is it?
Yeah, on something so controversial. It went fairly smoothly, but I'll tell you, there's a lot to getting a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal. I must say Dr. Musha and Dr. Mehta of Mehta Publications that publish this Journal of Space Exploration. It's a different JSE than Journal of Scientific Exploration. It was a pleasure to deal with a scientist of that caliber. I was kind of surprised to see it accepted, and for him to report back with such positive comments. It's a published paper, as controversial as it is. It's difficult. You have to have the format right. You go through the processes. The one mistake I made was at the end they have what's called a galley proof, where you have the last minute changes, that you make that would be their typographical errors, not any content. And I failed to get that all in on time. But otherwise, everything went smoothly. It's published. People can read it. We've actually have a technical paper published in a peer-reviewed journal on this very controversial, very specific feature that is all part of the Mars artifacts argument.
And it is amazing. Now, we've got at our highlights reel at coasttocoastam.com some of these geoglyphs that George and JP provided to us. Make sure you get a chance to take a look at them. If you don't have a computer now, do it tomorrow morning. They are strange, George, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And JP was actually the one that discovered this formation back in, I guess, 2001. And it caught the attention early on of Dr. Van Franlin, who I'm sure you remember in early 2001, he did a press conference in Washington, D.C.,
yep.
Showing a whole set of, he was presenting evidence of, these artificial structures, mostly pictographic formations that he had found through other people's research and his own research. And this was one of the highlights that was presented at that conference, or that press conference, which, there's a long history connected to this so-called Nefertiti face, or the profile face, that, like the face on Mars. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of story behind it, and we're just very excited that we actually got this paper together and finally published. We're celebrating.
And you should. And JP, for people who aren't by a computer, would you kind of paint us a picture of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it's controversial. When you look at features, I mean, you have to understand, I always make presentations on this subject, and people are very interested in it. They don't necessarily agree. I've learned the hard way that you have to explain from scratch what's going on, because it's very difficult for people to understand what this is.
And then explain it again.
Well, what it is archaeologists on Earth will use satellite imagery and aerial photographs to look for promising digs and to also develop existing ones better. Like Sarah Parcak, for example, is a well-known archaeologist that's known to use this technology. When we look at the Mars images that have been returned by our space probes there, we're doing that same sort of thing. You're looking down at the surface of Mars, and all of a sudden, people starting back with the early researchers, Vince DiPietro and all the others, say, hey, we're seeing things that look artificial. And it's very subjective. It's very difficult to take images and say, hey, this looks artificial. On Earth, when these archaeologists do this, they take their images and they make an argument to people who are going to foot the bill, right? And to go and make these at least preliminary digs to see if there's something. Well, this is on Mars. The very idea is difficult for people to accept, that there could be artifacts, structures, and things up there that we're seeing in the images. But, a pyramid is one thing, but geoglyphs or large-scale art is another. You're seeing a face. And, you've heard the expression, you can see the face of Jesus in a tortilla chip.
Oh, yeah.
I think I've seen something on the Internet where they actually had something like that, where it actually looked pretty good.
Or on a piece of toast or something
like
that.
You and I joked last time about seeing faces in the nap of the carpet.
That's right.
But, so this is what's going on. And it's a very difficult thing to get in people's heads so that they understand that we're doing a sort of archaeology has to do with humankind. I don't know. We don't even have language to describe what we're doing. We say geography when it's really nothing to do with Earth. So yes, what's happening is that we're studying the Mars images, and what we see, and I'm sorry I'm going on.
No, that's okay.
What we see in the in these images, is that in this particular case, we see what appears to be something that was made on the surface in a sort of artistic sense. It could be something more complicated going on. But yes, it looks like a face in profile, approximately 2.5 kilometers across, large now. Remember, the image resolution is not very good.
Unlike the face at Cydonia, which was part of a structure, like it was carved out, this looks more like it was etched or painted in, doesn't it?
Right. The face on Mars, the famous face on Mars, appears to be a very large mesa that was originally natural, but kind of developed.
Like Mount Rushmore.
Right, yeah, but facing upward, right?
Right.
And this, you're right. This one is made of depressions and elevations, mounds and such that have been, we think, possibly excavated. There's some reason to believe certain areas don't look like they could have been made naturally. So yeah, we were looking at pits and mounds and things that have been dug out with not too many great changes in elevations, dark and light areas that if people say there's shadows, we have a great piece on that. On people are still talking shadows, really haven't read our paper. We went to great extent in the paper to show that those are not shadows. Yes, it's not a mesa, it's not a mountain. It looks like an excavated area, not very deep.
And to me, what really strikes a pose here with this thing, it's not the face alone, but when you add in this Egyptian-looking hat that it's wearing, then the whole structure looks like it was made, doesn't it?
That's the thing. When you look at these kind of things, it's so subjective. It has to come together as something to you looks like it had to have been made. And there's so many parts to this thing. George notes many, he's an artist now. He can point out many things that come together and say, this probably has to have been artificial. And when you're mentioning the cultural references that most people immediately acknowledge, there's a reason why it has been commonly referred to as Nefertiti face, right? We don't think it really is Nefertiti, but it sure does remind us of those Egyptian crowns and Egyptian art where they show the whole eye, even though it is in profile. That's a very detailed eye. If that was a realistic head, that person's eye would be on the side of their head like a deer's, you know? It's a problem if you want it to be realistic picture of a face. When you look at somebody's face in profile, you don't see the nasal point. But here's their whole eye, and that's one of the main reasons it reminds us of Egypt, the eye of Horus, you know, and the way they drew people's faces. Sometimes in Egyptian art, you'll see they got two left hands and things, and it kind of reminds us of that. And so you're right, you know, it has an Egyptian look to it. All this, of course, is just what it reminds us. We don't really know what it is, but yeah, that Egypt. I'm glad to hear you say that, because most people acknowledge that it does remind them of something Egyptian.
It sure does. Now, if it is indeed some kind of artwork, etching, whatever it may be, but that it was made, what do you think the message is that they tried to convey to people? Obviously, you see it from above, so they wanted somebody from above to see it, didn't they? How about you?
Well, that's, we have the same tradition. This is George speaking now for the audience. We have this tradition here on Earth. Ancient cultures produce these large pictographic formations. We have the pictographs down in the Nazca Lines, down in Peru. American Indians all throughout the Midwest and in Wisconsin and Ohio. We have the great mounds that the Indians built, and some of them were linear type of formations that you could only see from above. They were all over the United States. They recently found one over in Russia of a big deer or an elk, which that was just recently found. So this is like a human tradition to create these large pictographic images that we can see from above. And looking at this profile face on Mars, you could say, well, it's like seeing images in clouds or something in the wood grain. And in nature, it's true. You can find formations that look like a face. It may have a forehead and a nose shape and a lip and a chin and maybe an ear. Might even have a dark impression that looks like an eye. But that's about as far as you may get, like 4 or 5 points of anatomical features. But we're looking at this face on Mars that goes way beyond that. We not only have a nose, we have a nostril, we have a mouth, we have lips, we have the forehead, we have an eye, we have an eyelash, we have the iris. I mean, there's just secondary features that we're seeing in this, which goes way beyond something you'd see in nature by chance, which I said would basically be maybe 4 or 5 points. So this goes well beyond that.
Well, it sure does. Now, this was obviously done prior to, let's assume the Martians are us. They came here and duplicated many things that we still see on Mars. Was this an escape mission to come to this country, this planet, or was it something exploratory? What do you think it was? Start with you, JP.
Oh, that's the fun stuff. To speculate about how that is, where it came from. Geez, my mind reels into all kinds of what we call origins scenarios, right? And none of those are acceptable to people. Tom Van Flandern told me himself, a world-class astronomer here, he said that nobody is in a position to know what can and can't be found on that place. And he included himself in that group. So but the problem is we start talking like that. None of these things really, I'll tell you right now. Hey, Mr. Nouri, I see you on TV once in a while.
I pop up once in a while.
And there's this television series that I enjoy. I watch it once in a while, and I think you do a nice job commenting on things. And I don't know if I can mention the show on this
you mean Ancient Aliens?
Yeah, the Ancient Aliens show.
Sure.
On the Ancient Astronauts theory. This is something I'm pushing 60 now. I've been reading about this since von Daniken's book back in the 60s, and I found out that this theory even precedes him. To von Daniken's credit, he's known for he never claimed to be a great scientist, but boy, he asked the crucial questions at the right time, and inspired a lot of us. I've been studying this Ancient Aliens, Ancient Astronauts theory for many years, and I'm to a point now where I'm not ashamed to say it's probably true.
Yeah.
And anybody who disagrees needs to go back and do a little homework. It's a strong theory, and we've yet to test it. It's a perfectly testable scientific theory, and there's much more work to be done. Most of the researchers, of which you are very familiar, Philip Coppens, Andrew Collins, all of them, Childress, and they, all of them might not be totally correct in their findings and conclusions, but I think as a whole, the theory stands very strong. Of course, Mars and the artifacts we see there is tied into all that, along with the UFO phenomenon. So if you're familiar with the Ancient Astronauts theory, and this starts to come into the picture, well, how does this tie in? Well, if we have indeed extraterrestrials that have come to our planet in a very distant past and have had their hand in humankind, maybe even made us, like many religious texts.
The Sitchin theory, as I call it.
Pardon me?
The Zecharia Sitchin theory.
Well, of course, Zecharia Sitchin. I have all his stuff here. I have a row of paperbacks here that takes up the whole shelf. His 12 Planet series. How would Mars come into play? Well, of course, if you've got extraterrestrials coming into the solar system, wouldn't you expect to see them leaving their mark on our moon, and the other planets? In fact, we've got junk on the moon ourselves.
So, John, let's get back to your work, and George as well. So this paper that you've been working on, has NASA reacted to it? Have they seen it? JP, let's start with you.
Well, they don't treat this subject very well. It's the great image. Let me tell you, those are great scientists that get results.
Yes,
they have these very complicated missions, and there's tens of thousands of images we have to study. They even had a wonderful image request, a very user-friendly site where enthusiasts like me could actually image certain areas. It was great. A fifth grader can do it. I've imaged a lot of. I've managed to get quite a few images you feel like you're actually pointing and shooting the Mars Global Surveyor. Mock cameras yourself when you do this. And it sounds like a like a pretty technical accomplishment, but they're user-friendly site. I'm telling you, an average person can do this. They're absolutely wonderful, but they, of course, don't treat our work very seriously or give it any attention at all. There's a considerable amount of ridicule at times. You know how they'll post images like the Gale crater that looks like the happy face there and all these Valentine hearts and stuff, and I don't know why they waste all their energy posting these little things like that. I think it's a dig at our kind of work. But yeah, I haven't heard anything from any of them about this paper or any of our stuff. I don't know. I get a feeling sometimes there are people there who take it seriously but don't publicly come out and say anything.
Okay, now with the paper, I assume you had conclusions. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we made a lot of conclusions. First of all, there's things about shadows. We can say for certain that the dark areas are not shadows, that they are darkened lower elevations, that the higher elevations are the lighter colored ones. We showed that there appears. This is how I found the whole thing in the first place. I was studying fluid being ejected from a fault north of that face. It appears to flow downhill to the south, which is opposite most of the planet, into this ravine, and then into this area, darkening the low areas, and it appears like there's a fluid there, which is controversial enough on Mars. But to throw this in, yeah, we've had a number of conclusions about what you see. What is it that we're actually seeing? You're not looking at clouds. You're not looking at a Rorschach ink block chart. These are real features on the surface. That the elevations from the Mars Orbital Laser Altimeter, we went to great lengths to show that what you're seeing is real there, and that there's probably fluid and there's low-lying areas.
What about vegetation in the dark areas?
Oh, that's another question. There's a great science fiction writer was involved in that with his banyan trees. I don't know about the vegetation there. We're dealing with primarily Mars Global Surveyor images that are in the 5 to 6 meter per pixel. Let's face it, every dot on the screen you see represents a small room in your house. So what are we going to see for It could be vegetation. There's considerable discussion about that these days. But that's another argument I try to skirt because we have enough problems arguing artificiality, let alone talk about fluid on the surface, which is supposed to sublime. There's not supposed to be any fluid there. And vegetation, my goodness. The Viking probes came back with positive tests for microbial life there, and it's been controversial for years. Now we're talking vegetation. I don't know if I want to go there.
Wasn't it Arthur C. Clarke that talked about Mars having plant life?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about before. He saw some pictures that look like what he called banyan trees.
Yeah, they do look like vegetation.
We have a researcher by the name of Greg Orme from Australia who came up with what he called a spider ravine model to try to explain that. It's very difficult to say. We need to more science needs to be done. Hey, do you mind if I digress a little bit, go off into another subject?
What's the subject?
Luke Gossett Jr.
Oh, yeah, throw in a quick one.
Put us in a bad spot following that, man.
He's a great guy.
What a wonderful racism. Isn't that a great name?
Actually, he said that he was your warm-up act.
Well, my goodness. Yeah, he warmed us up.
Did he know what was
right.
coming after his show?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if he's still in the studio, but
No, he's gone.
The reason I say this, I feel compelled to say that as an instructor at a local college here, I have the pleasure of getting to know, at least in some capacity, dozens of young people every semester in their early 20s. And you know how people are always saying, this young generation, what's the matter with them? This country's going to crap, No, I feel exactly opposite. all the students I deal with there in their 20s are way better than our crew was when I was their age. They give me hope. And when he talks about tolerance and racism and stuff, I've discovered that it's almost a non-issue for a lot of young people now. At least we have a surprisingly diverse group for where I live in this part of the country, and it's like it's not like they're tolerant. It's like they don't even seem to care. And in a way, it gives. So my message to Mr. Gossett is that his efforts for people like him are paying off. Our young people are fantastic, and he has. You said that in the segment that that he's hopeful about humanity, and these
and he really is too.
These young people that I deal with every day, they really do inspire you and give you hope. The world is better. Is going to be better because of them, and I just wanted to say that because I think Lou Gossett Jr. is one of the great Americans.
Yeah, I do too. What do some of these young people say about their professor who's writing about geoglyphs on Mars?
You got right back to our subject, didn't you? Yes.
How do you like that?
Tell them about your presentation you did at the college.
Oh yeah, I do several things at the college. I must say, they don't tend to have the students that I know. I have as many as 80 to 100 students per semester, and they tend to have interest. Some of them are just a passing interest. Some of them are ready to argue against you, and I welcome that. They know how to do that. Since the advent of the internet, my goodness, George knows? Don't the arguments get vitriolic sometimes? It seems there seems to be these two extreme camps. Either you have the extreme skeptic or you have the extreme believer, and George and I are among a group that tries to tread somewhere in the middle. The students in general that I deal with approach it critically and aren't really ready to make these leaping conclusions without knowing a little something about the situation. Have an informed opinion, and it's an interest. I think in part because of these popular TV shows that you see out there now, and it's an interest, and I don't get those scoffing, exasperated reactions I will sometimes get from people. They're receptive and curious and reserve judgment.
What are the possibilities of these structures, whatever they may be, that they might be cloud-like patterns that, as we talked about the carpeting and patterns last time, you look up in the sky and see these clouds and you can say, hey, look, there's a dog. There's my grandmother's face.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that comes up all the time, that you're using too much of imagination. It's like looking at clouds as a response I get all the time. And you tend to get that from uninformed people who, I hate to say it, they're uninitiated to the work we're doing. You just don't. I've learned that you do not just take a slide or a picture and plop it in front of somebody and say, "Look, there's a face."
That's right. You got to back it up, and you do.
And of course, if you present it to them like that, it is like looking at clouds. It is like sticking a roar chart, block chart in front of them. I'm asking them to go ahead and use their imagination, and so it's hard to present that to people who really don't understand that this is a real satellite image of a real planet, and those are real surface features you're looking at. And yes, you can be fooled, and we're pattern-seeking creatures. We joked last time all about the tortilla chip. You're going to see, but the issue here is this thing good enough to suspect that it had to have been made? And when you look at clouds, you're looking at clouds. You're not going to say that was artificial. Maybe a jet contrail, I guess, is artificially made. But see, there's a perfect example. You look at the clouds, you'll see a jet contrail over here and a cumulus cloud over there. You can differentiate between the artificial and the natural. That's what we're doing.
Well, look at what we're looking at. Cairo means Mars. the Nefertiti figure looks like something that the Egyptians would have. There are a lot of similarities here. And I don't believe in coincidences, as people know by now. It's too weird.
Yeah, you can have coincidences. It could happen. But what are the odds? I like playing cards with people. You know, how much? I'll tell you, the problem is generally that your opinion on whether it could be artificial usually goes right back to your preconceived notions, your predispositions of what can and can't be found on that planet. And there, you know, the problem is that we as researchers who try to present evidence and argue that this is probably artificial, we don't have a real standard of evidence to meet. Dan Drayson, one of our SPSR researchers, wrote a whole big thing about this. He calls it the ever-receding evidential horizon. It's like no matter how much evidence you produce, it's never enough. And statistical evidence is usually lost on people. You know, you have to kind of sit and play cards a little bit and say, okay, what's the odds the first card on the deck is this particular card? And, you know, well, 1 in 52. So if I pick that card off the top of the deck and it's the card and we were betting, you owe me $52. You know, and now we put the card back in and we do it again. What are the odds now? Well, it's 1 in 52 squared, man. You know, they don't really understand the incredible probability, the odds against artificiality. I mean against it being a natural formation. And so, you know, statistical numbers and things really are lost, don't mean anything to people. And that's basically all we have for an argument is that, you know, when I look at this, I see something that is probably artificial, and it's a very difficult argument to make. I'll tell you this stuff about artificial. Thing, you know, that's a thing. I mentioned Sarah Parcak. That's the arguments they have to make when they go to get funding for digs, to get grant money, and somebody at some point has to be convinced that this is worth investigating.
That's right.
And you know, it's a tough argument to make when you're talking about a whole other planet that is outside what Parcak calls the archaeological landscape. You know, it's really weird. It's a strange thing, difficult for people to understand and accept, and it really threatens a lot of worldviews. Some people, I think, sometimes we're accused of psychologically needing to see something in the images. I would argue it's the other way. I think the skeptic has more of a psychological issue there than someone, because they have so much at stake if it turns out to be true.
All right, let's get George's take on this, too. George, go ahead.
It's like what JP's saying. People on the other side, they get very threatened, and, you know, if you convince them that it does look like a face or it does look like it might have been made, you know, then they add more hurdles that you have to jump. Then, you know, who made it, why they make it, and why is it there, and it's all these other questions that you can't answer. So because you can't answer those questions, it must not be real. But the thing that we have to, like JP was saying, and this is a discussion we have with the other members of the Society for Planetary Study Research, we're trying to establish what a standard would be to say that you're looking at a candidate of a formation on the planet that you want to establish if this meets the criteria to be artificial. And, of course, in clouds and things, you can see a head shape, you know, with a forehead and maybe an eye like I had before.
But, you know, what's funny, someone else might not. I think with these Mars images, everybody can see them.
Exactly. But I'm just speaking generally, where you could find, you know, rocks around your neighborhood that are tree trunks that kind of look like a face. You know, people will say, well, that's what we're seeing on Mars. But those things are very general. They're usually generic. And they don't meet the high standards that we're looking at with this profile face, where we're seeing, you know, secondary features. You know, not only lips We're seeing the parted lips, the nose as a nostril, and all the detail in the eye. It just goes way beyond, just a generalization of a portrait. This is real artwork that we're seeing here in this image.
And what do you think, again, George, on your take, what do you think the reason for this was? I mean, again, you can only see it from above, so they were showing it to somebody.
Yeah, they want somebody that is a spacefaring culture that's flying over this planet to see this, and hey, looky here, look at these things. That was what Richard Hoagland's original idea and premise was about the face on Mars. That was placed there so we would see it, and then we would investigate the Cydonia area and find out all about the 19.5 and the tetrahedral geometry. That's maybe why these things are placed there, for us to catch our eye and come down there and find out what's going on. William Saunders and I, we've got 2 books full of examples of these things. And, we put the science paper together a couple years ago with the parrot formation, which is listed in some of the images that you have up, just as an example of, the history. We're working on these images, putting a lot of effort in this, getting science papers published. And the reason I think these things are put on the planet is to communicate with us. I think this shows a lot of information about who we are.
How close do you have to be?
Things look familiar.
You can't see it from our planet, though.
No, you'd have to go there.
No, this is a satellite image of a feature that's about 2-3 kilometers across, with not a lot of contrast. And of course, you can't see features like that with telescopes on Earth.
No, not at all.
Just think how if you're in an airplane on Earth and there's a large scale art form, like Nazca maybe, that's a couple of kilometers across, how high up you have to be to appreciate that down there. That's kind of what we're talking about.
The Nazca lines weren't even discovered until the early 1900s, when people were flying
over
the area.
That's right.
And back in 2001, down in Corral, Peru, this huge pictograph of a face was found down there while they were excavating this the ruins in the old city of Corral, Peru. And as they were flying in, the archaeologists and the supplies, they looked down, and my God, there's a huge geoglyph that they didn't even know about. And that was just found in back in 2001. So these things are, like the elk over in Russia, these things are being found all the time. And you don't see them on the ground, you're walking right over them. But if you're flying in a spaceship or in an airplane at the right altitude and you look down, then these things all come into focus.
And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, plasma physicist Dr. John Brandenburg with us. He did his graduate work in California at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in controlled plasmas for fusion power. He has worked in defense, energy, space research. He's also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, which discovered water on the moon's poles. And the focus of Dr. Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to the unification of the 2 long-range forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, and here he is back on Coast to Coast. Hey, John, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, George. Hey, it's a great honor to be back on your show.
I'm looking forward to all of this, and you were on with me months ago. We got to get you on more often, my friend.
Well, we have new data. We have new stuff. Stuff for Mars, and you guys, everyone can see it on my website, lifeonmars.pub. We have the latest data up
Beautiful.
there, including what's Murphy's Law has struck on Mars, apparently. The rover was dropped as far away from Cydonia Mensa and Galaxis Chaos, another archaeological site on Mars, as possible, so they wouldn't photograph any ruins by accident. And so they're driving around taking pictures. And they took 2 pictures of this thing that looks like a carved Aztec idol.
I love it.
And so I have both pictures up on the web. They both confirm there's teeth. The mouths are full of teeth. Anyways, Murphy's Law. I can just imagine the meetings at JPL.
Oh my God!
The manager screaming at everyone, "How did anyone let this happen? How did we let this through?" And to make matters worse, one of the pictures in the series is marked access denied.
We got our money's worth out of those rovers, didn't we?
We sure have. I mean, they've done a brilliant technical job. And, we look at things like the face on Mars and say, well, this is an exciting possible scientific breakthrough. They look on it and they say, millions of layoffs.
Exactly.
Because as one veteran of JPL told me, the management there says, if we find anything exciting on Mars, the astronauts will come from Houston and take Mars away from us. Imagine, George, you're in charge of the planet Mars, and somebody comes along with cowboy boots and takes it away from you.
How dare they?
That's right. This would be a terrible disaster. So we found that they've apparently taken pictures of a real artifact. It looks like about the size of a dinner plate, and it's ugly.
And on your website, how do we find it?
It says Aztec Head. The headline is an article on Aztec Head. Also, the government just released pictures of the pyramid at Cydonia.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a pyramid right about 5 kilometers from the face. And the pyramid on one face, on one of the facets of the pyramid, appears to have a square doorway. Upon close examination in high-resolution pictures, it actually appears to be a place where brickwork has failed in a square pattern and fallen down the side of the pyramid, and they have taken two new pictures of this. Those are both up on the website.
This is exciting stuff. John, how did you get interested in Mars?
Well, actually, Mars, as I explained in my bio, my major role has been to try and harness fusion energy and complete Einstein's work on unifying gravity and electromagnetism. Mars was kind of a distraction, but in the middle of the Cold War, 1984, I saw, the work of DePietro and Molinar on an evening show, and I called them up. It was the day after Christmas when I saw it, and I was just astonished at what they had found. And so I called them up as soon as I got back into the office using the government phone system, and they sent me a pamphlet showing all their work, including the pyramid they discovered 5 kilometers away. And I took this to work and showed it to my companion scientist colleagues, and they were all astonished. And they said, wow, this looks like the real deal.
Yeah.
And so I joined an investigation team called the Independent Mars Investigation Team. We verified all of Greg and Vince DePietro's work, and Greg Molinar of Vince DePietro, and we verified their work. We actually found more stuff, and we found remains of an ocean on Mars. We went to a conference, published it, and the world has never been the same since.
Gosh, you guys were way ahead of the curve, weren't you? Way ahead.
Well, we were trying really hard, and the goal for a lot of us was we wanted to end the Cold War. We wanted to, if there's a barnyard brawl going on, if the barn catches on fire, the brawl will stop, and everyone will have to work together to put out the fire on the barn. And we just thought that this was it was a shot, it was a chance to make a big discovery that would change the world and end the Cold War. And as we congratulated ourselves later over several mini beers, we all bragged that we had, in fact, helped end the Cold War because it ended. The Mars cover-up still sort of continues, but hey, they have opened the floodgates now. They have so many probes orbiting Mars, providing us data. We have more pictures of the face on Mars, probably 100 images, a lot of them at high resolution. It shows nostrils in the nose. Most people think that thing was put to bed back in 1998. When they released, it turned out a fuzzed up, very poorly contrast-enhanced picture of the thing basically in profile because they'd taken the picture from the side. So it looked very different than everyone expected. It looked like a footprint in a snowbank, or, as we joked, an object in a cat litter box. When we enhanced it, we found out it had, and figured out the geometry, that it wasn't taken from above, it was taken from the side, sort of. It shows nostrils in the nose, and then we computer rotated it, and it looks just like the Lion Man from Wizard of Oz. So we actually presented that to Dan Golden, the head of NASA.
What did he say? What did he say?
We never heard his comment. We handed it to his right-hand man, who took it upstairs. But I know what he said. He said more pictures need to be taken.
Well, that's encouraging.
So the hope of Jet Propulsion Lab to kill the whole controversy ended. We went to another scientific conference. We presented all the pictures in our analysis, including the Lion Man photo. One of the guys from JPL showed up and he threatened to punch DePietro in the nose.
I haven't heard from Vince in years. Is he okay?
I don't know. I tried to call him, and his phone requires a code. But anyway, that's his business. I think he's retired.
We've got a link from your website to that Aztec head too at coasttocoastam.com, which
right, and also you can get go on the net and do Aztec head, and you'll get Truth Seekers has got a very good enhanced photo, much better than mine. But I found a second picture, and it matches the first one. So we have two good images of this thing, obviously kind of taken by accident. Murphy's Law is one of the most powerful laws in the universe.
It looks like it blew up or something, right?
What's that?
That head looks like it blew up or something.
Well, it looks like it looks like it's had part of it's been knocked off. But
yeah,
it's got a nose, eyeball, mouth full of teeth. The teeth all line up. So it looks to me like a carved artifact. And since we have a pyramid, a big face, at Galaxis Chaos, we have a second face on Mars. Almost looks like the first one. All those pictures are up there on the website. And but more than that, we now have evidence for enormous hydrogen bomb explosions on Mars. So taken together with the archaeology, this suggests a great tragedy.
We're going to get into some things that happened on Mars, John, and get your take on that. But tell me, what is a plasma scientist for a lot of people who don't know what that is?
Plasma is like a lightning bolt. It's like a neon sign. It's electrified gas where it's called the fourth state of matter. If you have a ice cube in your hand, that's solid. It melts in your hand. That's a liquid. Finally, it evaporates. It turns to a gas. But if you heat the gas high enough in temperature, the electrons start coming off all the molecules and atoms and move around like in copper. So it conducts electricity. It glows. And this is the stuff that the aurora is made of, or a lightning bolt. And the stars are all made of plasma. The sun is a ball of plasma. So it can be shaped by magnetic fields. It's a wonderful kind of tool for energy. We have gotten large releases of fusion energy in devices built to confine these plasmas in a magnetic bottle called tokamaks, and we've made great progress. It turns out it's really difficult to try and make a star on Earth. It's a lot more difficult than regular nuclear power, but we've made enormous progress, and I believe the combination of fusion and fission, we can combine the two. It's called hybrid nuclear power. Mm-hmm. This will be the clean, safe, infinite power source that we've been looking for.
How far away is that?
We solve the energy crisis. We solve the climate crisis.
How far away is that from implementation?
If we implemented a crash program, we have everything we need now. I'll have more of this up on my website, but I believe in 10 years we could have the first hybrid power. And by the way, using fusion, you can render the nuclear waste from fission reactors safe. You can transmute the high-level waste into harmless, stable.
That's remarkable.
Oh, yes. It's a breakthrough. This has been studied down at University of Texas at Austin quite extensively. It'll work. And, in fact, the nuclear waste is now worth money. You can make power out of it.
So the big utilities, John, will probably try to figure out, how do we make money on this?
Oh, well, that's their business.
Before we release
They're not in these business for their health,
That's right, or the well-being of ours.
But the important thing is that we can solve the energy and climate crisis now. We have the technical means to do it. It's going to be solved by E equals MC squared, infinite source of power for the human race. We can solve this thing.
That's exciting.
Yes, it is.
It really is exciting.
I look to the future now with great hope, where for a while I was a little discouraged.
John, when you look at Mars, you know it had an ocean. You know that it had a heavy atmosphere. And when you look at the artifacts that something drastic happened there because everything seems broken up. And yes, I think in time, things and structures will decompose and collapse. I saw a show on the Discovery Channel about a year ago where they said even the tall skyscrapers we have today, the metal and glass, everything would decompose over thousands of years to just rubble. You wouldn't even know what they were. But something happened on Mars. What do you think that was?
Well, first of all, we know Mars was Earth-like in the past. It had an ocean, rivers, and unfortunately, we see the artifacts suggesting it had everything the Earth has, an intelligent species living on there. Then some unknown catastrophe, in the words of NASA, happened, and Mars became like it is now, very un-Earth-like. And unfortunately, the atmosphere of Mars is loaded with the residues from a massive nuclear explosion. The Mars atmosphere is full of a characteristic gas called xenon, and it has one isotope called xenon-129.
Okay.
And on Earth, the amount of xenon-129 rose by 10% since 1945 due to open-air nuclear testing and also production of plutonium. Both of these require fast neutrons that you don't find in ordinary nuclear reactors. So this is weapons signature. Now we have also found out there's another gas produced by nuclear weapons called krypton. It's not the planet where
Superman
came from. This is a gas in the periodic table. And these are inert gases. They don't wash out of the atmosphere. They don't react chemically with anything. So they stay in the atmosphere forever after they're made. The xenon and the krypton are consistent with a massive nuclear explosion. This explosion, we also know, irradiated the planet's surface with neutrons because the meteorites we get from Mars show signs of being bombarded with an intense fluence of neutrons. And not only that, there's radioactive debris scattered all over the surface of Mars from two spots. One of them is near Cydonia. One of them is near Galaxis Chaos, the two areas where we found archaeology. So, and finally, the areas that are radioactive are covered with glass. So these explosions apparently happened in midair, and they turned thousands of square miles of Mars surface into glass, just like at the Trinity nuclear site, where the first nuclear weapon was fired.
Let me ask you an interesting question as we get into this, because you're getting very close to a major story here that I think so many people are interested in. Ancient writings in India point out clearly some kind of nuclear confrontation.
Yes.
Is it possible? And I've always made the assumption it might have been this planet Earth. Is it possible that they were writing about a nuclear confrontation that might have been on Mars?
I'm certainly aware of those passages in the Bhagavad Gita. They find, by the way, this nuclear glass called trinitite, also in India, or it's an area of India and Pakistan near the Pakistani border. It's kind of hard to investigate, but it's called Mohenjo-Daro. And they found evidence also of vast numbers of bodies that were unburied when the city was destroyed. Instead of being eaten by scavengers or buried by somebody, they were just left there, undisturbed. So this looks like something like this could have happened on Earth. However, whatever happened on Earth was a much smaller scale than what happened on Mars.
Okay.
The estimated yield, we have from the amount of xenon in the atmosphere on Mars, xenon-129, we can estimate the yield is 1 billion megatons. It's mind-boggling.
Could this explosion have been the cause of an asteroid?
No, this was definitely a nuclear explosion.
This was a detonation.
This is a detonation, and it happened in midair. My first theory, and I went to conferences and presented, was that it was a natural nuclear reactor on Mars. On Earth, we had apparently natural nuclear reactors, and they harnessed nuclear power, a billion years ago, and they ran safely in kind of pulses. And I thought something like that had happened on Mars, and it had gone unstable. But no, that would have left big craters. And also, the xenon-129 is not produced by nuclear reactors. The only thing that produces xenon-129 is a nuclear explosion with fast neutrons. So we were able to rule out. I went, by the way, to the premier scientific conference on planetary subjects, the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference in Houston, Texas, this year. I went and presented a paper on anomalous nuclear explosions on Mars, and I stood there and held forth, and no one contradicted me. No one came up to me and says, "No, John, you got this wrong. We can explain the xenon-129 some other way." Finally, one scientist just looked at me and said, "Did they do it themselves, or did somebody else do it?" So
that's the
I
big
presented
question.
this at scientific conferences, and no one has come up with an alternative explanation for the evidence we have found. I've connected the dots, and no one can connect them any other way.
How many explosions were there?
Looks like there were a very large one near Cydonia Mensa, in a place called Mare Acidalium, then a smaller one, maybe 1/4 the size, near Galaxis Chaos. And they both happened upwind of the site, so the fallout and the strongest shock waves would have gone down the prevailing winds to Cydonia and Galaxis.
Might they have been done by visitors from above, or from inhabitants who are on the planet?
It doesn't look like the inhabitants there did it. And I'm basing all this on an Earth reference. Scientists like to stay as close to the known as possible. It looks like it was a primitive civilization on Mars. We're talking ancient Egypt or the Mayans. Whoever did this looks like they dropped these tremendous hydrogen bombs from space.
Jeez. Why would they do that, John? Especially the
George,
primitives.
I don't know why.
Okay.
People do terrible things on this planet that sometimes defy comprehension. It looks like that same, as one person said, as below, so above. We live in a universe where the Earth and its people are not an aberration on the universe. We are part of the universe's fabric. The rest of the universe is probably just as screwed up as this planet is.
It's hereditary.
Well, if you have intelligence, you have misbehavior, George.
Yeah, that's true. We got it from somebody.
And so this terrible thing appears to have been a deliberate act by a more advanced race that found the civilization on Mars and decided for some reason to destroy it, perhaps because they thought they would be a competition at a later time. That's the best.
Jeez.
That's the best working hypothesis I can come up with.
Well, then the same thing could happen to us, John.
Well, that's why we have to go up there, George. We can't just sit here. This is, in fact, I've told people, this is a Darwinian cosmic intelligence test for the human race. If you can't connect these dots, we're going to look like Mars. Who knows how soon? We have to go up there. We have to come spacefaring. We have to send astronauts up there to dig through the ruins, find out exactly what happened. Did the Martians know who did this to them? We have to have Captain Kirk and the Starship Enterprise and the Federation Starfleet in 100 years.
Well, and I'm going to make an assumption here that what might have happened on Mars, those entities that did this came to Earth as well. And maybe they came to Earth, as Zecharia Sitchin had reported, as the Anunnaki,
Maybe these events appear to have happened on Mars sometime between 1/4 to 500 million years ago. So this was very, very a very long time ago, before even the dinosaurs. Now, I believe we're going to find out, George, we're not alone in the universe. And we
know that.
We have to deal with that. And the universe may be a rough neighborhood.
It may be. For whatever reason.
So, what's that?
For whatever reason.
For whatever reason. And what Zechariah Sitchin was deciphering from the tablets is that we, sometime during the human era on Earth, we were colonized by some extraterrestrials who maybe did genetic manipulation of us.
Right.
The human race, as we know it, appeared fairly suddenly in the geologic record. I mean, there were people sort of like us, and then suddenly, boom, here we are. Not that great in advance, but we are what we are. And I believe we're going to find out that we had a lot of contact with extraterrestrials in bygone eras. The human race is, in its present form, has been on Earth, they estimate, 200,000 years or more. And we only have records of 6,000 years, of our own civilization.
Well, that's why there are some that think that good old planet Earth is only 6,000 years old.
Well,
I'm not a believer.
Some people think the Earth is flat too.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
I have a book, Death on Mars, written where I lay out all the data on this. And one person panned my book saying he didn't believe in nuclear weapons.
Let's talk a little bit about this discovery now of the new data of the Aztec head, the doorway in the pyramid, the city, of course, besides the pyramid area as well. Then it would seem to me then that the civilizations were somewhat primitive, as you've pointed out, to have these kinds of artifacts around, right?
Right. I mean, we are based on what we understand from Earth archaeology. This looks, people who construct massive, big stone things like this are fairly primitive. We don't see any highways. We don't see any airports or anything like that. It's all just massive kind of stonework, like the Incas or the city looks a lot like the reconstructions of Pompeii, only it's much larger near the base of the pyramid. And what's interesting, George, is the government itself is releasing this stuff.
Why?
Well,
it's not
when
a
we
mistake.
Found evidence for nuclear explosions on Mars, we reported it to the Pentagon. We knew we were under surveillance. We knew one guy was an agent for the government, so we contacted him and said, please report to your superiors. This is what we have found. This was back around in 1998. And we didn't hear from him for 6 months, and then the message came back, and as usual, dealing with people in intelligence agencies, our question was answered in turn with a question. They said, why don't you publish? So at Vince DiPietro's urging, I undertook to publish, and the first idea was that, okay, this was a natural nuclear reactor.
Right.
And so that everyone accepted that idea. It got into the conferences without any trouble. When I found out from talking to people at the conferences that Xenon-129 is not made by nuclear reactors. It's a product. It's a bomb. It's a weapon signature.
It's a weapon signature. That's right.
And so then and by the way, we've now found weapon signature in the Krypton too, which is the other shoe.
That's an amazing discovery.
It's taken a lot of hard work, George, and I basically I will admit that I'm a bull terrier. When I grab onto a problem, I don't let go of it.
Well, I'm glad, because look at what you've discovered here. My God.
So the U.S. government has known about this since 1976, I estimate.
I find it interesting that Stephen Hawking, the physicist, is warning all of us to be very careful about sending out too much information to extraterrestrials.
Oh, we sent them maps, on the Voyagers.
Yeah, we
Actually,
did.
They don't need maps. we're holding a rock concert here on Earth, George. The universe is like a ghost town. In fact, Fermi, the great scientist, commented, where is everybody? If we're fairly late on the scene, the universe is much older than the human race, there should be lots of people out there like us, and we should be hearing their broadcasts, and we don't. And he said, where are they? And there's a great silence out there, George. It could be that if you're really smart in the universe and understand the score, you keep quiet.
You keep quiet.
Right, but we have been we've lit basically had a Burning Man festival here, and lit a big fire and had a rock concert. We've announced to everyone in the neighboring 100 light years that we're here.
They all, and I do find it ironic that Hawking would say, "Be careful." You would discover tragedies on Mars that were created by ETs or someone who blew them up. There's an interesting paradox there. And speaking of paradox,
I thought it was quite interesting that he came to the same conclusion I did. There's among people who look for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, there's a principle called the principle of SETI called the mediocrity principle, which basically says that the human race is typical of intelligent life in the universe, not atypical. We're not exotic.
It's teeming everywhere.
It's right. You're going to find people if you want to know what intelligent life in the universe typically acts like, turn on the news. Now, there's a problem there that SETI people do not like to discuss, and that is that human behavior is often misbehavior.
Yep.
We are a very ferocious, warlike species, and if we are typical of the universe, then there are probably people out there you don't want to talk to. The Klingons, the Romulans, or the Daleks from science fiction.
The Death Star.
The Death Star. And so people who want to search for extraterrestrial intelligence, they don't tell their sponsors about this. They say, anyone we talk to out there will be obviously wiser and nobler than us and will teach us all sorts of things.
So true, John.
Just like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You saw how well that turned out, right?
Independence Day.
Well, I found it interesting that they made Close Encounters in the early 70s, and then at the end of the 70s, the movie was Alien.
Yeah.
Kind of flipped everything on its head.
They're working on another Independence Day type film.
So
they've come back.
Ever since H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds.
That's right.
The first H.G. Wells was a really smart guy, and he knew how the human race behaved. And at that time, by the way, for most of the 1800s, people were convinced that Mars was a living planet.
Mary Joyce, welcome back to Coast AM. How are you?
Fine. It's always good to talk to you, Richard.
Likewise. Well, this is exciting. These memoirs recently released from Clark McClellan, just I guess about a month after his death. Tell me do we know how these papers or memoirs came into the author's hands? Was he intending on publishing these prior to his death, or were they discovered? What do we know about them?
Well, normally I don't interject my personal involvement in stories, but I will since you've introduced this story the way you have. And back in 1986, I moved to Cocoa Beach, Florida. I now live in the mountains of North Carolina. But anyhow, I lived between Patrick Air Force Base and the Kennedy Space Center. And during that time, I met a lot of NASA people. And in 1989, I got to have an extended time with Clark McClellan. And he was trained as an astronaut, but he also was trained as a spacecraft operator. So what his job was to monitor everything from the spacecraft, and he could jump in from the ground and fix many problems or, take over controls. And so he had a pretty significant, position. At the time I met him, he was under great distress. He believed that the public had a right to know more than NASA and the government was willing to, let out. And he talked a little bit too much. And so at the time I met him, he had moved off the beach, moved to somebody's home that I know, and he just rented a room. He was in fear of his life. He was being blackballed by NASA. They ultimately, I think in 91, completely got rid of him. They destroyed his career. They destroyed his ability to get other jobs, and they kept him from putting out any kind of information. He was under so much stress at that point that he literally was sweating when he would talk about it. And not only was everything coming down on him at that point, but a good friend of his was Judith Resnick, who was one of the astronauts who died in the space shuttle explosion, the Challenger. And
right.
His emotions were just raw at that point. Well, it's kind of interesting because on May 17th, I just had this sudden urge. I needed to check and see what was going on with Clark McClellan. When I did this, I found out that very day, his papers had finally been published, which he had never been allowed to publish. And so in the year preceding his death, he had been giving his papers to a man with the understanding that he would publish it as a book after his death. So not only did I get this urge on the day that the book came out, that's when I found out that Clark had died, and he had died less than a month before that at the age of 85. But because I saw that raw emotion myself, I wanted to do whatever I could to help get his story out. I did not want to depend on my memory of things. So I waited until I got a copy of his book because I wanted to make sure that whatever I put on the Skyships Over Cashier's website, was accurate. And we're certainly not going to quote my memory. That's not a good way to do an article.
All right. Now, how did Clark McClellan come to meet and then befriend Wernher von Braun?
They met back in 1959. They were both involved with the Saturn I mission projects, and they had a lot of common interest. Not only were they both aerospace engineers, but they had very intense interest in astronomy, in life beyond Earth, and they shared a lot of these common interests. Well, what would happen, these most private conversations usually happen when they would meet at one of the Cocoa Beach hotels for some kind of a NASA function. And von Braun, who was a smoker, would always invite Clark to join him, and they would go out and find some lounge chairs around the pool or out overlooking the ocean, as far away from other people as they possibly could. And it was during those one-on-one conversations where, they couldn't be listened in on that he revealed a lot of the things that Clark has shared in his book.
And did he well, they were friends, I know, but we know von Braun's history. What were McClellan's personal views about von Braun, just his character and what he was like?
Let me jump in with my own opinion on this one, and that is that people who are so intensely interested in something like space travel are more focused on that than they are the politics. So when he was in Germany, Germany provided the vehicle for him to do the thing that he loved. When he was brought in with Project Paperclip, he was given the opportunity to do what he loved the most in our country. So I think he was more of a scientist focused on his primary interest than he was on the politics.
All right, so let's talk about Mars, because McClellan asked von Braun what his thoughts on Mars were, whether it in fact had ever been inhabited, and what did von Braun tell Clark McClellan about the Red Planet?
Well, I kind of just jotted down some bullet notes. I have 5 of them that I really want to share. One, and now mind you, this is all being said in the 60s. He told Clark that he felt they would find evidence of life had evolved on Mars hundreds of thousands of years ago. He felt that in future orbital, photographic, or manned-Mars missions, they would discover ancient ruins of buildings or technology. Again, this was more than 10 years before the first picture was ever taken of the face on Mars. He felt that the Mars civilization was very advanced technologically and was capable of space flight. He felt that the planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter had exploded, and when that happened, in his opinion, it began to destroy the atmosphere of Mars. So to preserve their culture, some of those on Mars fled in spaceships to Earth. And one of the statements that he said to Clark, that Clark said really stood out in his mind, was he felt that at least some of those in our present human culture may be Martians. He said that Earth is being visited by other intelligence from other stars, and that Earth is a nursery of many cosmic races from the stars.
And did McClellan feel that von Braun had some sort of inside information, or did he think that von Braun was merely speculating?
Von Braun told him that he had seen ETs from Aldebaran. That is where he said the Aryan race came from. He said that they came many, many thousands of years ago to Earth, but most recently in the early 1930s. And that's when they were working with the Germans to develop weapons that were far ahead of those in the U.S., Russia, and Japan. Clark asked him what they looked like, and he said that, yes, he'd seen them, and he described them as taller, and many had blonde hair and blue eyes, and von Braun said, I have heard other of us Germans at Kennedy Space Center admit that they saw them too.
Did von Braun tell McClellan, not to divulge this information, or that this was
at that point,
in strict confidence?
At that point, it was private. As far as I know, Clark was not going to release it until after the passing of von Braun. I don't know the exact commitment that was made, but he was blocked by our government from sharing anything until his book finally came out in May 17th. So
and did
he
McClellan
kept it a secret for a long time.
Right. And what was did McClellan in these papers reveal how he reacted to Wernher von Braun's statements about Mars and about Aldebaran and the Aryan race?
The things that surprised, I think the thing that really got his eyes open that kind of surprised him was the whole idea of there might be Martians among us, and that this Aryan race had been visiting Earth for, just hundreds of thousands of years.
And what about von Braun's views on other alien races or craft interacting with the human race?
All I can tell you is he said that Earth is being visited by other intelligence from the stars, and that Earth is a nursery of many cosmic races. So if he elaborated more on that, I do not know.
So he met other top German scientists at NASA.
He worked directly for his immediate boss was, and I'm probably going to mutilate his name because I can't say it in German, it's like Debus, but it's Debus, and so that was his top boss when he worked at NASA. And Debus was the second only to von Braun. Right.
And what about these? We've seen the declassified photos of the V7. That's that saucer-shaped craft. did von Braun or any of the German scientists at NASA tell McClellan about the V7?
This is something that I found very interesting that was in his book, because he was told by the German scientists that the same type of V7 craft that was developed in Germany was the type that flew over Washington, D.C. in 1952. In 1952, there was a whole bunch of, I don't know how many, but a whole bunch of UFOs that flew over the Capitol. And, everybody thought they were aliens. But according to these sources, it was the early German UFO-type plane.
And these were the craft that were flying over the White House.
That was a surprise to me. I remember years ago meeting a lieutenant colonel, and when he lived in the D.C. area as a boy, he saw those go over. And, of course, he thought they were from outer space. It changed his whole life. He was involved with, different UFO investigative organizations for the rest of his life because of that. But in actuality, they were created here on Earth.
But this is 7 years after the end of the war, so they were still in operation, but they had moved their base, I guess, from Germany to the Antarctic. We are back with Mary Joyce, the founder of SkyshipsOverCashiers.com, a fabulous website. Check it out, SkyshipsOverCashiers.com. And we're talking about the memoirs of the late Clark McClelland, an aerospace engineer with NASA, 35 years, a friend of Wernher von Braun, and some of the astonishing details about these private conversations they had about Mars, about other alien races visiting this planet. So this flyover, this famous flyover of these UFOs over the White House or the Capitol building in 1952, it was revealed that these were, in fact, this was a fleet of German V-7s, these flying saucers. So did McClelland sort of put two and two together and figure, all right, this is 7 years after the war. These are German-built flying saucers flying over the White House. They have this base in the Antarctic.
I can jump to another story I did years ago about the man who developed the security system for not only the president's planes, but also for Area 51. And he was at a meeting once. It was an important meeting. They met at Tonopah, which is even more remote or more unknown than Area 51. And they were supposed to give their reports of things that were going on. And this plane just flew right in and went right up to the entrance to the building where they were meeting. And a man got out dressed in what you might call high European style with certain kinds of leather, shoes, and looking very sophisticated. He walked in. He sat in the back of the room just listening to these different scientists give their information. And when he finally spoke, he spoke in high German. And then he got back on the plane and he left. And so that was the first time I really talked to an insider who felt like, the Nazis were still very much involved with things that were going on, even though they lost the war.
What about Roswell? Did von Braun tell McClellan anything about the supposed alien bodies that were recovered from the crash site? Or was that a Nazi incursion into U.S. airspace?
I really cannot answer that question. I really do not know. If they discussed it, I'm not aware of it.
So if the Germans had these saucer-shaped craft, these V-7s, this is obviously, we're talking about anti-gravitics and we're talking about very sophisticated technology. I mean, where did they get it from?
According to von Braun's conversations with Clark, the Aryan race that came in from I always mess up the name of the star system, Aldebaran, provided some very sophisticated information to the Germans that no humans had, and so
were these?
And so
sorry,
that
go
was
ahead.
why that space program with the Germans developed so rapidly.
Right. If they were working with the aliens, why didn't they dominate during the Second World War?
I don't know. I wish I had dug deep into all of that history, and I just haven't. But a lot of men lost their lives on the ground war, and that's where they seem to have been defeated. The ship or the saucer that they developed back then certainly didn't have the sophistication of the saucers that we now see flying around in the air.
And were these crafts, developed, were they hangared, I guess, in the Antarctic? Where did they come from?
My understanding is there are ships down there now that are beneath the Antarctic. And people would be very surprised to know, or many people would be, that there are a lot of active volcanoes on what you might call the western part of Antarctica, if you're looking north toward the United States. And there are these old, lava tunnels that have been created. And so a lot of things have been expanded from those to create underground bases. Plus, they knew how to, build them also. And beneath the ice, there is literally like a river, and went up these rivers beneath the ice to carry all sorts of things into that base.
It was also, didn't they refer to it as New Schwaben's land as well?
Yes.
So how did their friendship end? Because von Braun, I guess...
I think it was more
left NASA in 1970, but they were only friends in, 7 years, between 59 and 66? Do we know what happened? Did they have a falling out?
No, I think it had more to do with the involvement of von Braun's career. He was, he was out in Houston, much of his career, and Clark was always in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center. So, and I think eventually, toward the end of von Braun's career, he was promoted to something, I think, in Washington. So I think it had a lot to do with proximity.
And the idea, again, that the Germans had these V-7s, this sophisticated craft, far superior to anything that the Americans had, I would assume.
That's everything that I have understood. That's correct.
Right. So if von Braun was aware of that, and then all of a sudden he comes to America and he's working on the Saturn rocket, which is, rocket fuel. Didn't they bring von Braun over for the purpose to develop craft similar to the V-7? Did he have a working knowledge of how the V-7 worked?
You're asking me questions I don't have the answers to. He was hired to be the rockets specialist for NASA. He was the head of that. And I don't know if he himself had the technology or the knowledge of the technology of how to develop that V-7 that the Germans had. I just plain do not know. Not everything is spelled out regarding von Braun in this book. There's an awful lot of information that came out, and it certainly didn't all focus on von Braun. Clark talks about his friendship with David Scott, who was the lunar module pilot for the Apollo 15 crew. And because the two of them were buddies, James Irwin told him about what he saw on the moon. So there's, I can get into that if you want.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about Dave Scott and James Irwin from Apollo 15. They confided in McClellan what they saw.
No, it was just the only one that talked to him was James Irwin.
Okay.
And he was the lunar module pilot. And he told Clark that both he and the commander, who was David Scott, that they both saw these white metallic objects flying overhead when they were, coming toward the moon. And he said that they were able to fly with great intelligence. They could do tight angular moves, and they could do sweeps above them. and they heard no sound and no of any kind. And he, quote, I like this little quote, he said, they were very fast critters. That just sounds like the way somebody would talk to a friend.
Right.
Again, he drove the lunar module device, and when he did that, he saw other vehicle tracks. Now, mind you, that was the first time the lunar rover was roving around there. And Russia and China and Japan or anybody else who might have the technology had not been up there with any kind of vehicles that would leave a track. So finding vehicle tracks on the moon really got his attention because they knew that they weren't from human vehicles. In addition, where these tracks were, they found evidence of mine exploration, where digging had been done. He also saw structures on the moon that he described as looking like glass or crystalline. And he was able to take, I think he said, about 15 photos of the craft and the structures. But when he got back down to Earth, they took the camera and the film, and he asked to see it. He wanted to see the pictures he'd taken. They showed him, I believe it was only like one photo. It was one of the photos he'd taken of these crystalline structures or buildings on the moon, and he was amazed, and those are his words, he was amazed that those structures, had been erased or replaced with other images so that you couldn't see them. And, he wasn't happy about that.
Did Irwin ever speak out about this?
I can only quote the conversation he had with Clark. I don't know how that went with anybody else. Now, like I mentioned earlier in the show, I met Clark in 1989. He was still working at NASA. He was let go from NASA in 91, just 2 years later. And I think I'm telling you that what really kicked it off was he was working as a spacecraft operator, monitoring the screens at the Kennedy Space Center, and for over a minute he saw a giant ET, about 8 or 9 feet tall, in the open space shuttle payload bay with 2 human astronauts. And he also saw their spaceship back where the shuttle's main booster engines were. I think when he, blew a little bit of the whistle on that, I think that was the final nail in his coffin, so to speak.
And
he was not the only one that saw that. The camera picked that up, and the camera at another time picked up either the same or a similar ET that was 8 or 9 feet tall, and it was picked up by a camera in the space shuttle cruise compartment, and this large ET was interacting with the crew. He must have been really cramped because the compartment is designed for astronauts no taller than 6 feet, so he was really hunched over to even be in there. And as soon as NASA in Houston saw that was coming up on the screen, they jammed the crew compartment camera so that nobody else could continue to see it on Earth.
Remarkable. Others obviously saw that, but no one else was willing to speak out about it, and he wasn't until, I guess, he published his memoirs.
Like I said, he would have come forth with this information. He tried to come forth with this information long before this, but he was always stopped. He could never get anything published. He could never do anything until, after he died and somebody else had been able to get it out and printed. And at the beginning of the book, there's a list of people's names. Most of them are kind of blocked out, and you just see a title, but it was a tribute to people who obviously gave the money to get the book published.
And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. An incredible story, artificial structure on Mars verified in a science journal. First, let me introduce William Saunders, we call him Bill, a graduate of the University of Alberta in Edmonton back in 1977 with a Bachelor of Science degree in geomorphology. He began work in the petroleum industry in Calgary, Alberta in 1978. Currently works as an independent petroleum geoscientist consultant in Calgary. Mr. Saunders began looking at the Mars Global Surveyor images with their first release back in April of 1998, and he met Mr. Haas on a website conference room shortly thereafter. Hey, Bill, welcome back. How are you?
I'm good, George. Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure.
The bio is a little out of date. I've actually retired and moved to southern British Columbia from Calgary.
You would never retire.
Oh, yeah. You got it someday.
All right. And George Haas is a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research and the founder and premier investigator of the Cydonia Institute. He's a member of both the Pre-Columbian Society of the University of Pennsylvania in Washington, D.C. He is a well-known author as well, The Martian Codex. And here's George Haas back on Coast to Coast. Hey, George.
Hey, George, it's a pleasure to be back here talking to you.
You too.
Exciting stuff here.
You too. And I'm going to just, both your mics are open, so jump in at any time. But tell me about this release, this incredible story about the artificial structure on Mars that apparently has been verified. I'll start with you, George.
Yes, it's a long story. This is, over 10 years working on this paper with Bill and our fellow authors, other members of the Society for Planetary SETI Research and the Cydonia Institute, Michael Dale, who's a geologist, is out in Oklahoma, and my good friend James Miller, who's an image analyst and specialist. He's up in New Jersey. We've all been working on this since a colleague of ours back in 2002 presented this image that he had found in a Mars Global Surveyor image back in 2001 that was released. And he noticed it, I believe, a year later after it was released. And he presented it on a discussion board that was run by James Miller, called the Anomaly Hunters. And that was put up on the board back then, and we were all pretty excited about it. But we only had the one image, and this is way back in 2002. And then a year later, the Mars Global Surveyor took a little higher resolution image of it, more overhead, and that was another Mars Global Surveyor image that was released in 2003. And that's basically all we had for 5 or 6 years. And that's how this all started. The formation is a very symmetrical, three-sided pyramid. It has a circular base, 3 angles. There's the 3 symmetrical triangle faces around the formation. And it's just pretty stunning, and we were very anxious to get more images of it. So this is how this all started.
All right, and Bill, tell us a little bit about your involvement with George and how this started for you.
Well, I am an associate director of the Cydonia Institute with George, and George is constantly sending me things that he wants me to have a look at, and definitely was intrigued by this object, by this structure. It sits alone in a channel. I guess it would be the best thing to be called. It's a canyon area it's very, very complex in its development. The canyon I'm talking about, there's all kinds of things have been going on here, lava flows. There's been water gone through here. There's probably water sat here at some time as well. And this pyramid sits by itself and totally unique and anomalous to the area. So I said to George, I'll join in and we can work on this. It was kind of an on-again, off-again project because we've had lots of others projects on the go, as you know, because we've been on your show with different things at different times. Mm-hmm. But we just managed to finally get it finished and get it published.
When you look at it from above, George and Bill, it is truly remarkable because at that point, it really doesn't look like nature made it, does it?
Bill?
No, it certainly doesn't. It's George will probably explain the geometry here in a bit, but it's Actually, he said the base is circular. It's not quite circular. It's each side of the three sides has an arced base, and there's three spines to the pyramid. One side of the pyramid appears to have collapsed to some degree. There's you can see where it's fallen away, and there's
on like the right side of it.
Yeah, a bit of a debris field at the base of it.
But it is remarkable. Well, George, let's talk about the geometry, because that's important, especially when one talks about man-made versus nature.
Right. If the listeners are able to go and take a look at the collection of slides that we have, they can look at the first one there, Slide A, which shows the two images that we've been talking about so far, the two early Mars global surveyor images.
Mm-hmm.
That's one on the left, the 2002. That's the one that Will Faust, a friend of ours, who has passed away, unfortunately, early on in this research. That's the one that he presented to us. And then, of course, the second one, which is a little sharper, you can see that the three faces are very symmetrical. The spines or the angles are very sharp. Like Bill said, this is, just jumps out at you when you see this, that, my God, what is this? What is this doing sitting there? And what we found doing the research in the paper is that this almost is like a Rolex geometry, which is because of that curved circular base. If you go down in the slides and you look at letter C, it'll show you the graphic going around there. And in this piece, we use eventually NASA took a high-resolution image with the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2007. They actually took two images of this formation. So then at this point, we had like four images to work with. And you can see the exquisite geometry that goes around this. I mean, it's just amazing that this formation is sitting there all by itself, appearing to be all by itself at this point. It's just astonishing, how we think.
And in terms of the height, how tall is it?
It's about 470 feet high. It's pretty tall. It's a large structure. It's about 950 feet across, which is about 1/5 of a mile across.
That's big.
It's a major sized pyramid. This isn't this is a lot larger than the Giza pyramid. So if it's about 470 feet high by about 950 feet across.
Go ahead, Bill.
I just want to say, and in Canada here we're more in the metric system, so but it stands out a little more. The height in meters is 145 meters. And the diameter at the base is 290 meters. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio, exactly 2-to-1 ratio, the base to the height.
Would you say that, Bill, that it is pretty symmetrical in that it seems to be precision pinpointed?
Yes. The Rayleigh triangle formation is the only formation that can be made out of three concentric circles.
If this happened to be natural, George, how would it have been made this way, naturally?
Well, myself, having an art background and looking at the structures and the sculptural aspect of it, looks artificial to me. As for any kind of geology, you'd have to talk to Bill.
Okay. All right. And in terms of, if nature were to make this, Bill, how would it happen?
Well, I've never seen anything quite like this in nature because usually you have directional forces on this, or on a formation coming from basically one major direction, and then you get weather systems and storms and stuff that bring forces from other directions. But how you end up with three sides exactly the same, mathematically the same, in an area that has nothing else like that, everything else is very, very irregular. I don't know how anything like this would form in nature.
And then when you look at the pyramids here on this planet, And there's always been talk that the Martians came here, some calamity, they escaped. I mean, it does bring you to some very fascinating possibilities, to be sure. What kind of material, if it's made by some other entity other than nature, what kind of material, Bill, might it be? Is it rock? Is it limestone? What might it be?
I think it's some form of rock. It's hard to tell. The side that is illuminated the most has evidence of stratigraphy along that side that actually looks like it could be casing stones. However, if you look at the north side where you have the bit of collapse, you can kind of see inside the structure a little bit, and it looks like it's fairly natural material. So my guess is this was piled up, but I'm just guessing really. There's so much wind-blown material here that's covering different aspects that it's difficult to say for sure.
At least here on this planet, we talked about the pyramids being power plants, or they are tombs for dead pharaohs and queens. So those other possibilities. What do you think this one might be, George?
Bill's right. The northern side, which is collapsed, looks like dirt and sand and gravel and things like that in there, and possibly what ancient cultures here on Earth did when building mounds. American Indians built a lot of mounds.
Yeah.
The Egyptians built mounds and pyramids, and a lot of these were originally built with, like he said, stacking earth and soil, and then the outside of it would be covered at times with more of a durable, stone or casting stones or blocks, and that's what we're seeing on the left side. So this formation on Mars is really revealing a lot of information if you get down there and take a look at it. And the only thing we can think that could produce something like this would be, the artificial influence.
Could this have been carved out of something that was already there naturally?
Certainly, and then the casting stones put on top of it. People speculate that's what the Sphinx was. Actually just a large landform there that was carved out to look like a Sphinx.
That's right.
So it's not out of the question.
Tell me about the other two authors of the paper, James Miller and Michael Dale.
Michael Dale, he's a geologist. He came to the Cydonia Institute back in 2010. He worked with us originally on the Parrot formation that we had found. That's actually another formation that Will Faust found. Will found this three-sided pyramid. He had a great eye. He was constantly scouring the surface of Mars looking for things, and he had found the Parrot on Mars, which we had a science paper.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, we were on your show with that.
Yeah.
And Michael Dale came on board because we had trouble getting the paper published. They said we needed another geologist, and I think they just said that in tongue-in-cheek, thinking that, they gave us like a month to get another geologist to join the paper or they wouldn't publish it. And I had known Michael for a while, actually met him on Facebook, and I immediately contacted him and sent him the paper, and he looked at it and joined the group, and we got the paper published. So Michael Dale's been a very intricate part of our group. He really has an eye for the geology, and him and Bill basically collaborate on all the geology. This goes back and forth. They work on a part and send it back. So it's taken us 10 years to write this paper, George.
That's a long time.
It is, and we have 14 years of images in the paper, which, all these different images are taken at different times, different years, different seasons, so we get to see the effects of light and the environment on these formations, and that seems to be consistent. So that's who Michael Dale is. And then there's James Miller, who I've known for must be 20 years, and he's from New Jersey. He's a independent researcher. He's an image specialist. Mm-hmm. He does all of the enhancements and things of our early work, and Jim Miller really taught me a lot about how to enhance the images and worked with the NASA photographs and stuff. So Jim's great friend, and he's been in working on all of our papers also. So.
Were they all astounded, everybody who worked on the paper, were they all astounded when they initially saw these pictures?
Well, I know when I sent it to Michael Dale recently, because he hadn't seen this, because he had no idea about any of this stuff, that this little three-sided pyramid. He wanted me to tell him where it was on Earth, because he didn't think this was on Mars.
He wanted to go see it here.
He didn't believe it. Yes.
And now, of course, you are very familiar with the face on Mars in Cydonia, obviously.
Oh yeah. How
close is this pyramid to that area?
Well, this three-sided pyramid here is in the Candor Chasm, and it's in the Western Hemisphere, next to by the Valles Marineris.
Okay, explain that to us, people who aren't familiar with Mars.
Right, the face on Mars is in the Northern Hemisphere. It's in Cydonia. Valles Marineris is like southwest of that.
How many miles do you think?
Oh, I have no idea.
I mean, thousands?
It's pretty far.
Okay.
It's pretty far.
All right.
The Parrot Formation is basically directly below Cydonia, and this formation is more southwest.
So if we sent astronauts to Mars in this region, and they walked up to this structure, would they be able to tell instantly if it was man-made? I'll say man-made as opposed to nature.
Well, I'm not sure, because when the settlers came to America and started going west and finding a lot of these huge mounds that American Indians made, a lot of them didn't even know that they were artificial hills, and some of them were as big as mountains.
True.
There were actually American Indian mounds that were as big as the Gaza Pyramid.
Well, that's true. There's one in Cahokia, right where I am. I'm in St. Louis right now.
When they came out there, a lot of them started, using the soil and digging them out, and then they found out that as they were taking them apart to use them for other means, that these were artificial structures. They would see round basket type of imprints where they would take baskets of dirt and keep piling it up. They actually found these type of relics that were still into the mound.
How many other structures might there be on Mars similar to this? What do you think, George?
We've scoured the planet, and we have a few in our files that are very similar to this, that have three-sided, triangular faces that look like a three-sided pyramid. In the paper, I didn't include a slide here, but any of the listeners out there want to go to the paper, I think the Coast to Coast has provided a link. We have a similar formation that was found in Cydonia, right down from the face, which we incorporate in the paper. So right in the Cydonia area, there's a much smaller three-sided pyramid that's right there in Cydonia.
William, I'm going to ask you to kind of paint us a picture of what life might have been like on Mars when this area might have been very vibrant and flourishing. Can you kind of give us a hint of what you think could have been out there?
Well, I would say there's a lot of areas of Mars that were probably oceans. This particular area looks like there were probably there's numerous occurrences of strata here that look like shorelines, and that is the area's undergone transgression or regression of oceans. And I would say that some of these structures in this area were probably islands that sat in the middle of a sea.
Well, that's interesting. Now, if there were indigenous people in that region, would they have lived around this too?
Yeah, I think we have some evidence that may be the case.
Yeah, there's a lot more here going on in this area that we're also working on. That possibly be another paper, but that'll be another time. Like Bill said, this whole area has a lot of evidence of water, and the reason we got the 2007 high-rise image was because of a planetary scientist by the name of Dr. Catherine Witz. she's the one that requested the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. They have a High Wish program where citizens and scientists can put in a request to photograph different areas for their research.
Yeah, and then they pick it, maybe.
Right, and then they pick it. And she's the one that actually got the high-rise image selected. And the reason that they were looking at this area was because of all the sedimentary rock. I think she's authored a few papers that deal with the sedimentary aspects of the area that we're looking at. And I have spoken to her. She actually lives here in Arlington, Virginia. And as Dr. Brandenburg says, when these scientists look at these areas, they're just looking at geology and they're looking for water. And that's basically what she's doing. She never even saw this.
Are they blown away when they do see it?
She didn't give me much comment, but she just said that she was not aware of the formation, and I had to point it out to her.
Has anybody,
it's like
George?
This stuff is right in front of them, and they don't see it. They're
Really?
looking for other things.
Yeah, exactly. Has anybody pointed out natural structures on Earth that could be similar to what we just saw on Mars?
Oh, there's a lot of conical shaped formations like this. They're all over the place out in the Midwest, but none of them have these flat, triangular faces with these, very sharp spines and angles. You don't find that.
No, you don't.
So this is totally an anomaly. If this is natural, this is a bizarre anomaly. And Bill discusses in the paper, I don't know if he wants to go into detail about all of these raked-like sand dunes around the formation, which are caused probably by wind. It almost looks like a cultivated field there when you look at some of these images. And he's perplexed about how those are formed when they're supposed to be formed by wind, but you would have wind directions in all different ways coming over this formation causing sand dunes, but they would all be going in one direction.
How old could this area be, William?
I don't know, George. I really couldn't say. It's undergone numerous changes over the years. As I said, there's evidence of different shorelines at different elevations. There's evidence of water flow as well as standing water, wind. There's been landslide movements. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's quite amazing to see the entire area in a high resolution and to scan it because it's very, very complex.
Indeed. But I guess we could say it could be millions of years old, right, if we had to guess?
Well, yes, the area, but the pyramid itself, it's hard to say. My thinking is it's relatively more recent than that because you don't see the evidence of shorelines around it that you see around some of the other rock. You don't see depositional material in the southern end of the spine, which, if the wind direction from the other dunes looks like it should leave a large tail of debris, it's not there. So possibly it was reworked or by wind or water, or not by wind, but by water, or by hand.
If you look at the planet from above, and then you look at these structures, is there any pattern to it, or any kind of connection between them?
Are you asking about like the placement of these structures?
Yeah,
finding
yeah.
These little complexes, or I haven't done any research like that, but a colleague of mine, Greg Orm, he's the one that found the king face, the queen face that we actually did a paper on a couple of years ago.
Okay, I remember that.
He's done an analysis of finding all of these structures, and he seems to think that a lot of these are found along the ancient Martian equator. A lot of these are found in that area.
Might have been an area that was heavily populated.
Exactly. That's and he's done a lot of research on that, and I think he has something on his website that goes into some of that, connecting the face on Mars and the queen face and some of the other things that he has found. A structure like the Parrot Formation would be way out beyond his study of this thick belt going around the Martian equator where he's finding a lot of these structures.
George,
this would fall into that area.
obviously something catastrophic happened to Mars some time ago. What do you think it was? Was it a collision with another planetary object? Was there a nuclear war there? What do you think happened?
Well, this is George. I think I go along with Dr. Brandenburg about the two explosions that hit in Utopia and the Sidonia area that destroyed the planet. I think these structures, like Bill said, were built more recent, and these were probably remnants of that war or that catastrophe. These aren't real ancient, geological formations. These are more recent, artificial structures that some culture built and was destroyed by some war, which Dr. Brandenburg pretty much documents in his book.
That could be. And do you think they came here?
Of course, yeah. This is where we came from. Like Richard Hoagland says, we are the Martians.
We are who they are.
Right.
It's amazing when scientists see this or other geologists. I mean, are they baffled by it? How about you, William?
Well, I don't know, to tell you the truth. I've been a little bit jaded. We've been doing this, well, it's coming up to 20 years since George and I met online and started working together. And I know that many of my former colleagues, when I was working in Calgary, they didn't really want to get involved in studying. They were in studying it. It was, well, we'll leave that up to the people at JPL or NASA or wherever. And I'd show them different things, and they just kind of shrugged.
And myself, I've found the same reaction to the limited access I've had to geologists and things like that. Especially this Dr. Catherine Witz, who I brought this to her attention. Haven't received any comment back. I don't know. I've sent her.
Really? Yeah, I would have thought she would have gotten excited about this.
Not that I could see.
Huh.
And she hasn't even responded back about reading the paper. So I don't know. I guess she just deleted it.
I mean, they don't even say, definitely this was made by nature. They don't even go that way?
No.
Huh.
You would think that would be the quick response. Oh, this is just natural, and blow it off. They don't even make that type of statement.
Are they interested in looking at it?
They may be in the privacy of their own home, but not publicly.
Not publicly. That's
Well, you can see that everywhere. George, we've got no press on this discovery.
Other than what we're doing?
Just what you're doing. We've sent this to CNN, Fox, New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Times, all the papers.
Nothing.
The journals, other journals, nothing.
That's disappointing.
Oh, very. Yeah, it's like, why are we doing this? Bill and I have been doing this, like you said, for 20 years. We've published 5 papers. This is our 5th paper. And it's like we're just spinning our wheels. I mean, it's nice to come on here and talk to you and have a great time. Later on, I'm sure we'll get some callers that want to talk about Bigfoot.
Oh, yes, you will.
But, where are we going with this? It's like nobody wants to touch this hot potato.
Tell me about the Society for the Planetary City Research. Tell me about the group.
Bill and I are both members. I've been a member, since I think probably 8 years ago or whatever. And it's a group of scientists that are interested in planetary research in our solar system. The members, I'm sure some of the people in the audience know Dr. Mark Corlado. He's a member. Dr. Stanley McDaniel, Dr. Brandenburg. All the luminaries of this research are all part of the Society for Planetary City Research. Myself, I'm just honored to be part of the group. My background is in art and sculpture. I don't have any science background. That's why I have, Bill helping me with the paper, because he's a geomorphologist. Michael Dale's a geologist. And but my background is in art. And the Society for Planetary City Research, most of them are geologists and physicists. And so I'm kind of like the odd man out being a member. I'm very honored to be in that group. And they've been around since 1991, I believe. So they've been really hard at work. And last year we lost the president, Horace Crater. He passed away. I attended his funeral. It was very sad. He died of cancer.
Oh, geez.
And so we just lost him last year.
Wasn't he the one, Mark Carlotto, the one who said that there's an eyeball in the face at Cydonia? Was he the one?
The humanoid side, NASA even took a high-resolution Mars Global Surveyor image, the highest resolution it could conjure up, and they did a very detailed image of the eye area. Yeah, there's definitely an eye. It's in our second book. We discussed the eye on the humanoid side. It's very detailed too. It's right where an eye should be. I think Richard Hoagland had made a big deal about that when that was taken back in the early days of with the NASA Mars Global Surveyor. So yeah, Mark Carlotto was very instrumental in doing a lot of work on the face on Mars. Dr. Stanley McDaniel, he had the book out about Cydonia. And so, yeah, a lot of these people that we're working with here at the Society for Planetary SETI Research, have a long history with this.
Well, you would think that with this recent report that was just released that admits that the government has had another study going into UFOs from 2007 to 2017, that somebody there would be interested in this just to at least take a look at it.
Well, I think people that are interested in UFOs aren't really interested in Mars and the moon and things like that. They're more interested in getting evidence of saucers and things like that flying, and photographic evidence, and the government coming clean about abductions and aliens. And structures on Mars are just I don't think they equate with their interest. My personal opinion.
Do you think that the inhabitants of Mars, and in terms of Brandenburg's theory of a nuclear war, it could have also been a nuclear war that came from outside of Mars, where whatever might have been on the planet at the time, maybe primitive life, might have been destroyed by extraterrestrials that destroyed Mars, right?
Well, that's what Dr. Brandenburg thinks, that he thinks the Martian culture was probably a Bronze Age, kind of like a steampunk type of culture. And they were just wiped out by this alien force that came in and just wiped them out.
The big question is, why would they do that?
Right, and that's the scary part about, is this what they do? That's why we're not getting any transmissions from outer space of other planets, telling us, hey, we're here. Because, once they know you're here,
they wipe
no
you
longer
out.
There.
Yeah, that might be a very warring type group of entities. I mean, I'm convinced that in Robert Oppenheimer, the founder of our atomic program, he was convinced that there was some kind of nuclear war or detonation a long time ago around India, Pakistan, in that area.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of evidence for that also.
Yeah, and so who's to say that the same group that destroyed Mars didn't do that here?
Right, and thought they were done with us.
Right, but we bounced back awfully fast. If you want to listen to our show ad-free, 24/7, access audio archives, live chat with me, and much more, you need to become a Coast Insider now. So you're telling me your grandmother, who died a few weeks ago, came and visited you last night in your bedroom, and you're not scared? Are extraterrestrials living among us? I don't know if it's true or not, folks, but we're going to find out. If you enjoy stories like these and want to learn more about the mysteries of the universe with me, become a Coast Insider now to access hundreds of our archive shows to listen anytime, anywhere. Sign up now at coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider. That's coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider.